Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar, all about mastering mistakes in Sage 50 Payroll. My name is Calvin and I will be your host and presenter for today. And I'm joined by Duncan and Lee, who will be in the background, who will be available to answer any questions that you might have throughout the session today. So the session is scheduled for about 45 minutes with the presentation roughly between 30 to 40, but we'll have a bit of time at the end to answer any remaining questions you might have. We're going to start off with a quick introduction about mistakes and errors that can happen. We're then going to have a look at the restoring a backup option, followed by the rollback. Then it's on to FPS adjustments. So what to do when you need to adjust the FPS that you've sent across to HMRC. Following on from that, it will be adjust your employee's pay. And finally, we'll finish off by going through all the further support that you have available, as well as any remaining time that we have for any questions that you may have. So that's what we'll be covering in today's session. So let's get started and we'll have a look at an introduction. So what can go wrong first and foremost? We've got a couple of examples here, although there are many examples out there of things that can go wrong, but here are a few of the more common ones. Firstly, we have over or underpaid. So if you've either over or underpaid an employee, then you need to correct that. Next, you can have a look at statutory payment errors. So potentially sick pay dates incorrect, maternity dates, things like that. You can also have the wrong pay date. So you may have accidentally used the wrong process date when you've been processing. The wrong national insurance category as well. And finally, pension errors. Now, as I mentioned, this is just a very small selection and the more common errors that we encounter. There can, of course, be a lot of other errors that can occur. So what options have you got when it comes to correcting those mistakes? So the first one is arguably the more simpler one, and that is to correct the error in your next pay run. So for those who've been over or underpaid, you can correct that pay in the next pay run should you wish to. So that just means increasing or reducing your employee's pay next time you come pay them. The second option, which is what we'll be focusing on in the presentation today, is to reprocess your payroll. So you can either restore a backup or roll back and run payroll again. Submit your FPS adjustment and then adjust your employee's pay and of course your HMRC payments, those last two being done outside of the program. So those are the two options that you have when it comes to correcting a mistake. So let's have a look at the very first one, which is coming to restore a backup. So restoring a backup. This is where you'll restore your own backup, so one that you'll have taken throughout your payroll process. Now, hopefully you'll have been taking backups very regularly because they are extremely useful and you'll see why shortly. The restore option is not the restore option, the recover option, apologies. The recover option is then you would be restoring a backup which has automatically been taken. So if you haven't taken any backups, every time you go to update your records in payroll, it takes an automatic backup and stores that in the background. So you can use the recover option should you not have a backup to restore. So when would you use this feature? So for recent mistakes, so if you've done one for the previous period, and when it affects all or most employees. So this is where you would affect all or most employees itself. And the reason we say that is because when you do restore a backup, it takes the program back to when you took that backup initially, which usually means then having to reprocess all of your employees. So if there's only one that's had an error, the next option that we'll look at is probably the better one. So that's why we suggest restoring or recovering when it affects all or most employees. So when it comes to restoring a backup, you'll be asked as part of the wizard, and we'll jump into a demo shortly and show you this, about which files that you would like to back up. Now, by default, it's only data files that are highlighted. So this is basic data, so your payments, company info, things like that. So your general processing data is found in data files. We have highlighted another one underneath because it is worth knowing about what this one does and why you would avoid it. This restores your FPS data. This is RTI files. Now, it's on the screenshot we've got only to be used in specific circumstances. Now, the reason we say that is if you restore RTI files, the program in essence forgets that it has ever sent a full payment submission. So if that full payment submission was received by HMRC, and then you go and process another one because you've restored RTI files, HMRC are going to have duplicate figures. So they're going to think you owe them twice as much as you actually do, which is why we highlight that, just to say it's for specific circumstances, and it's one just to be aware of. So what we'll do now is I'm going to bring up Sage 50 Payroll, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll restore a backup from some data. So here we are in our payroll program. So the first couple of things I want to point out while we're in here, and these are going to be key for when it comes to the demos throughout the session today, and that is the last updated and last FPS column. As you can see, our last updated is the 30th of July, apart from our employee number 5 here, which has the wrong pay date of the 20th of July. So there's the first mistake. So we're at the updated record stage. We haven't sent an FPS for July yet because our last FPS date says June. We've realized, however, we've made a mistake in everyone's pay, including employee 5, whose pay date is incorrect. So we're going to go ahead and have to correct that before, of course, sending our FPS. So what we'll do, we're going to restore a backup. So to do that, we go to File and then Restore. This brings up the Restore wizard. So we'll click Next. There's the window that we had in the screenshot that shows all of the files. We're going to keep it at the default, which is just the data files. Click Next. And this is where we're going to browse to find our backups. Now, a good bit of advice at this stage is when it comes to storing your backups, try and have them on a removable hard drive, such as a USB stick, or in a cloud-based storage system. The reason for that is if you ever need to access those backups from a different computer, something might have gone drastically wrong with the one you're using, a drink may have been spilt on it and no longer turns on, if all of your data and your backups is on that computer, then unfortunately everything's lost. So if you've got them on a USB stick, and that does happen, you can just jump onto a new PC, install Sage 50 Payroll, and then restore your backup, and everything's back to the way it was. So nice and easy. So that's a bit of advice there. So we're going to browse. You can see we have our backups that we've taken. So we know that we've updated July. So I need to go to the July pre-update section, because that's the month we are redoing, in this particular demo at least. Now, I've named these the way that they are. It's up to you how you name your backups. As long as you know when they were taken, at which point, it makes it nice and easy for you. This is my personal way of doing it, knowing that I've got a backup from when everything was completed, backup from pre-update, and a backup after I've updated records. And it just means I know exactly where I'm going back to when I restore it. So we've selected July pre-update. I'm going to click Open, I'm going to click Next, then Finish. It will prompt me for my username and password. We are using the manager one. Then click OK. And what you will notice, if we close the Advice Center, you'll see that the last updated column has returned back to June, which will now allow me to go ahead and reprocess everybody's pay and then complete July. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we'll jump into Enter Payments. So we know that this employee, if I go into Summary, is actually on maternity pay. So that one's correct. This employee is currently on statutory sick pay, as you can see here. So we know that we have actually paid them too much. We weren't meant to pay them that £400. So let's go ahead and zero that off. Save and Next. And the rest we'll just go through and say is correct for the instance of time for this one. So we've done the correction now. Remember, when we've restored that backup, everything that we'd previously done no longer exists, so we can now simply go and do it again. Okay, so this is the reason we look at all of these processes, so the restore, recover, and roll back, All three of those are the way to correct pretty much all of the mistakes when it comes to correcting anything. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of different scenarios. Unfortunately, we'll not be able to go through every single one of them, but knowing these processes will help you fix majority of your mistakes. So we've now gone back in. Let's update records. And now that we know it's correct, we can go ahead and submit our full submission. Now we caught this before we sent an FPS, which means we don't need to do an adjustment at this point. That will come later. So there we go. We've now completed July after correcting a mistake by simply restoring a backup. Now remember, we can restore a backup from any time. We could have gone back to before June was done, could have gone back to before May was done. Whenever you've taken a backup, when you restore that, it takes you back to exactly as the program was when that backup was taken. That's why it's very, very important to take regular backups throughout your processing journey. So that brings us on to the next one, which is the rollback option. So what does this do? Well, this removes payment history for selected employees. You can choose which period to roll back to. So we have a screenshot on the right there from a previous tax year. So we've had 6 months of that tax year. I know we haven't had too many months of this tax year yet, which is why I've kept that screenshot in. One thing to note on this, and we will show you this in the demo, when you choose your period, you want to be choosing the period of which you want to start your reprocessing. So for example, in that screenshot, if I want to start reprocessing from tax month 3, because that's where the correction is required, which is July, sorry. What we'll need to do, it's June, get my dates mixed up. What we'll need to do is select period 3. Okay, we don't want to go back to 2, because that will then need to reprocess an additional month. We need to select period 3. Okay, so for example, if we just the latest period, it's the very top line. It's never the one before. It is quite common that a lot of people will do that, thinking, well, I need to go before that one was done, which makes sense, but it takes you back to a pre-updated stage of the period that you're selecting. Hence why we say choose the one you want to start reprocessing from. And when would you use the rollback feature? So this is when you would need to reprocess earlier periods, or if you have no backup available as well. So it's a good one to use if you haven't got a backup available. And when it affects one or only some of your employees. So we'll jump into a demo and I'll show you. But when you use the rollback feature, you can select which employees to roll back. It just saves you having to reprocess any employees whose pay is correct. So what we'll do now, let's jump into the program and let's go ahead and roll back an employee. So here we are back in Sage 50 Payroll. What we've noticed, so separate scenario this time. Okay, so imagine if it's for a different payroll. I know we're using the same data set. One of our employees was underpaid twice for 2 months in a row, and another employee was overpaid for 2 months in a row, which is these two here. So what we're going to do, rather than having to reprocess 5 employees for 2 months again, we're only going to reprocess 2 employees. We're going to use the rollback feature. So we highlight our employees. You can find the rollback here in the link section, or it's available in tasks at the very top. Then roll back. We'll click next. There's our 2 employees that we have selected. If you've accidentally highlighted too many, you can change the selection at this window. Click next again, and here's where we'll be choosing our periods. Now you'll notice that it is only for the current tax year. If you do need to correct anything for the previous tax year, you would select period 1, complete the rollback process, change your process date to the 5th of April for the previous tax year. So in this case, it would be the 5th of April, 2023. You would then complete the rollback process again, and that will allow you to then roll back periods from the previous tax year. Okay, so Unfortunately, this is a new company, so I'm unable to show you that process, but it is a case of just running the rollback twice, having changed the process date in the middle. Okay, and then once you've completed the process of reprocessing your previous tax year, you would then do the earlier year correction, which is now classed as another FPS. Earlier year updates no longer exist. They're FPS adjustments, but they're called previous year corrections in the system to make it a little easier for you. So let's go ahead and roll back to the two periods that we need to redo. So I need to redo June and July. They were the two ones that are incorrect for these two employees. So we'll click next, then click finish. Then click OK. So now we can see that the rollback has been completed. So it's a nice, quick, easy process. But you'll notice on the last updated dates, the two employees that I have highlighted are now saying the 30th of May. So everything that we did for these two employees for July and June has been undone. We're now able to go ahead and reprocess. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to change the process date. We need to firstly redo June. So we'll click OK. Pop into enter payments. When it comes to reports with the rollback option as well, when you come to redo any pre-update reports, it will only show these two employees. So a good bit of best practice for that is you can either run the same report as post-update after you've completed all the corrections, or redo your reports as pre-update and then attach them to the originals via staple or anything, so that you've got a copy together, and then a highlighter pen can sometimes work. It's all down to personal preference how you want to do that. But just be aware, if you are only reprocessing a couple, any of the reports will only show those singular employees. So we know from previous that actually I've paid this person far too much commission. It was only meant to be 75. They got £700 extra. So we're going to change that to 75, save and next. And we know that this person was underpaid by £300. So let's change that on their salary. Click save and next, and then click close. Again, bear in mind on the mistakes front, there are a lot of different circumstances and scenarios. Fortunately, I can't go through all of them, but this process is the same. If you imagine you've never processed payroll for these guys before, now you can redo it the way it should have been in the first place. Okay, so that's now done. So let's go ahead and update records. We've now completed June's, so we need to go ahead and update July now. There's no FPS adjustment to be made yet. We'll get into that in the next section, and I'll tell you why in that part. But we're going to go ahead and reprocess July. And again, for timings purposes, their pay was the same mistake, so we know it's correct. I'll quickly show you. Enter payments. Yep, commission's right, salary's right. So now we can go ahead and update records once more. So don't forget to change your process date each time you're reprocessing a period. And you can see now the last updated date is back up to date with everyone, and it now matches the last FPS date. And that's the rollback feature done and processed. That does nicely bring us into the FPS adjustments section. So what does an FPS adjustment do? Well, it's quite simple. It shows the difference between the original FPS and the corrected values. So this just shows the difference and informs HMRC there's a change. When it comes to FPS adjustments, you need to submit this when your correction is completed. So you submit your FPS adjustment to HMRC when your correction is completed and your payroll is back up to date. So I mentioned after we did June that you would then go ahead and not do the FPS adjustment. You need to complete all of your corrections before you do this. So that last updated date and last FPS date are key when it comes to this. So once your last updated date matches the last FPS date, you know you're ready to go ahead and send your FPS adjustment. Now, with that in mind, there is a quick note at the bottom on this page. With an FPS adjustment, when you come through to processing it, I'll show you in the demo, on the figures that show as part of the process, you see in the screenshot, that's only for the most recent tax period. So only the most recent tax period will show. However, the other correction for the previous period or periods, if you've been doing multiple, will carry over in the background. So don't be too alarmed if when you look at the liability adjustment on that particular section, it's less than normal, or you're expecting it to be, or more than you're expecting it to be. It's usually because the rest of it is in the background if you've been doing multiple periods. So what we'll do is let's jump back into our program and we'll go ahead and do our FPS adjustment. So you can see now our last updated dates are the same as the last FPS dates. We know we're ready to do it. So to do that, we have an option here for FPS adjustment in the top left. Now you can find it in e-submissions as well. It's right there, or payroll as part of your payroll processes. Let's go ahead and click that. Hit submit. So you can see there that our liability changes are only for tax month 4, but we reprocessed both 3 and 4. The reason for it is 3 is sitting in the background instead. Go ahead, click submit, and that is your FPS adjusted. And that just means you've informed HMRC you have made a correction, and these are the new figures that need to be adjusted. And that is your FPS adjustment done. So that's the correction reprocessed within payroll. So you've either restored a backup and reprocessed, you've rolled back because it was a singular employee or you need to do multiple periods and then reprocessed. And remember, when you're doing either of those, you're in essence undoing what you've previously done for either all employees if you're restoring a backup or just the employees you've selected when rolling back, which allows you to then reprocess everything. Okay, so the rollback and reprocess process, I guess, I was trying to think of a different word for it, is the best way to go about correcting pretty much all mistakes. All right, now there are a couple, if it's in the same period, you can change, and I can see a couple of questions there, but we might get to them later. So adjusting your employees' pay. So you've gone ahead, you've reprocessed everything, it's all correct in the program now. We just need to make sure our employees receive the right pay. First thing you can do, compare the original payslip along with the corrected payslips to find the difference in net pay, which will then allow you to either make an additional payment to an employee for an underpayment, or of course deduct any overpayment from the employee's next payment. Now there's nothing to do in the program because you've already done all of that. This is about the money that the employees receive. So this is about physically paying them the cash, so making sure that they get the right amount. When it comes to the HMRC payments, you would compare the original and corrected P32 to find the difference in the total amount due. And then you would make additional payments or deduct any overpayments from your next payment to HMRC. Now we have put a little asterisk next to that because we do need to advise you that it's HMRC who are ultimately going to decide how you adjust the pay. So it is best to speak to them, but making the additional payment or deducting any overpayments from your next payment tends to be the more common way that it's done. But we do need to advise, if you're ever unsure, just double check with HMRC on that. So that's pretty much it when it comes to mastering mistakes or correcting any mistakes. Now, before I jump into further support, like I say, I have seen a couple of questions on this. So I am going to jump in and show you. So for leavers, if I bring up my program, if you have accidentally marked an employee as a leaver, so let's do it for one of our employees, do it for Paul here. Now I'm not going to go through the leaver wizard, which would then print the P45, and just for record, if you have issued a P45 to an employee, You can no longer reissue them in any other ones. They have to speak to HMRC if their pay is incorrect, or you need to correct their pay in any way. So once you've given them the P45, that's it. Okay, you can reprint them, but once you've issued it to the employee, that's it. Okay, so they can get one from HMRC. So I'm just going to pop a leave date in this employee, say the 15th of July. Go, hit save. So now that employee is marked as a leaver, but we accidentally omitted some of their final pay and their last pay for July. So we need to go ahead and reprocess. So what we'll need to do, first thing, is open up the employee again. That date I've just added, highlight, remove, save the record. Now we can go ahead and roll back and reprocess that employee's pay and then re-enter the leave date. Once you've done that, you can send an FPS adjustment, which will of course inform HMRC that you have now corrected that leaver's pay. So it is just a case of deleting the leave date, rollbacking or restoring, and reprocess, and then re-enter the leave date. If you haven't issued the P45, you'd then be able to reissue it or reprint it and then issue the correct one. Of course, if you have already reissued it, they will need to speak to HMRC to get the corrected value. Okay, so that does bring us nicely into further support that is available. And the first thing to talk about on that is the Help Center. So if you have any other questions, once the webinar has ended, they often come to you always at the wrong time. You can visit our help center at sage.co.uk/help, and you can search our knowledge base for the answers to that question that might have popped into your mind a little bit later on in the day. Of course, if you have any other questions about anything Sage 50 Payroll related, the Help Center is where it's at. You can also access this directly in your program now by clicking on any of the help buttons in the program, and it will give you the guide that is best suited for the area that you are in Sage 50 Payroll. So it's a nice little feature that was recently introduced. So I do recommend checking that out. You can also press F1 on your keyboard in order to get to that option as well. In here, you can find support guides. So you can see on the screenshot, we've got correcting mistakes in payroll as a full guide. We have access to webinars as well. So we have a couple of webinars happening next week as well. We do them twice a week. So if you want to see what's coming up, head on over to our Help Center, click on the webinars tab in the top right, and you'll see our schedule, which we do update regularly. So do keep an eye on that guide as well. There are videos in here, and of course, if you do need to speak to someone, then get in touch options are available through the Help Center as well. And last but certainly not least, and possibly the most important, Sage University. So I highly recommend you head on over to Sage University, where you can access a full library of e-learning courses, Sage certifications and badges as well, bite-sized learning, and a lot of it is free of charge as well. So I do highly recommend, if you ever get a spare minute, please do go over to Sage University and have a look through there. They can be done at your own time, in your own pace as well. And I do know time is, of course, very scarce when it comes to payroll, but if you do ever get a spare minute and you would like to expand your learning, it comes with a high recommendation from myself. Some of the courses in there are brilliant, and some of them even we use, so it's worth having a look. So that brings us to the end of the session. We are going to spend a bit of time though answering any remaining questions that you guys may have, so please do keep them coming. We'll run it until the Q2 mark, or of course until we run out of questions, as it were. If you are leaving us at this point, thank you so much for attending today. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure to see so many people join us today. You will be directed to a short feedback survey when it comes to leaving the session. And it does mean a lot to both myself and Duncan, who also does webinars with me, if you do spend a little bit of time filling that in for us, because we can't make changes or improvements without that valuable feedback. And it does mean a lot, and we do read it quite religiously to see how we can improve and make these sessions even better for you guys. So I'm going to jump on mute now and help them out with the questions, and I'll be back shortly, either if we hit the Q2 mark, or of course all the questions have been answered, and I'll pop back to say our final goodbyes. Thank you. Okay, so I can see we've had quite a few questions come through, and whilst that's been happening, I've jumped in and we've got a bit of historic data. So I am going to jump into the program now and show you that earlier year update, or correcting a previous tax year, as it were, and how you would roll back twice in order to go back to a previous year. So let's jump back into our program to show you this. So we're going to stick with Paul here, and we're going to roll them back multiple times to show you the process of doing it for a previous tax year. So let's go ahead and roll back. This time we are going to select previous period 1, click next and finish. We will get this message asking if we want to clear all the following information. Now, because we're redoing everything, yes we do. And then we're going to click OK. Now you'll notice there, Paul no longer has a last updated date because we are in the current tax year. So now what I need to do, change our process date. So let's go to do it the 30th of March. Any process date in the previous tax year will suffice. We often use the 5th of April. And then we'll go ahead and click the rollback option once more. Click next. And you'll see now we have our periods from the previous tax year available to us. So we're going to do 2 periods from the previous tax year. So let's click next again and then finish. And OK. Now you'll notice that because we've changed our process date, the last FPS date showing as March, it's in the previous tax year, but our last updated date is January. So first thing we need to do, change the process date into February so that we can go ahead and reprocess this employee's final 2 periods of last tax year. Let's go into end of payments. We'll change their commission again. Say they didn't get any last year. And close. Update the records. Then we'll change process date once more, back to March. Click OK. And we'll jump into end of payments once more. And at the end, we'll give them some more commission this time. End of the tax year bonus, we'll call it. It worked in payroll and it did really well over the year end. There we go. Now we need to update records once more so that March is done. Here we are. Now, we change our process date to the 5th of April, just like this. Click e-submissions in the bottom left. And you'll see now we have amended a previous tax year. So let's go ahead and click on that. It's going to ask us why the FPS is late. We're correcting an earlier submission. I'm going to click OK. You'll see this is now a full payment submission adjustment now. Click continue. Click submit. There's our liability adjustments. Click submit once more and then close. So we've now done the earlier year update, or what was the earlier year update before they changed it to an FPS adjustment. So we've reprocessed the previous tax year. Now we need to go and reprocess the current tax year. So again, it's as simple as changing the process date. So we'll do April's. We'll leave the payments the same and we'll just update records. There's a couple of periods to do to get back up to date. There we go. Change process date again. And normally you would go into enter payments, make sure everything's correct. As I mentioned, just trying to get through this quite quickly to get back up to date for you. We're nearly there, but 2 more to do. Go. Now we do our final one. We'll make a change in this pay. So they've had a lot of bonus now, so give them no more. Then we'll update records. And as you can see, we're back up to date. So once again, it's the FPS adjustment to be ran. There we go. There's our liability from this tax year. And that's done. So that is the process if you need to roll back into a previous tax year to then reprocess anything. Now, the same process occurs for a backup. If you're restoring a backup from a previous tax year, still need to do what we've just done when it comes to reprocessing. But with rollback, you'll see that there's 2 times you need to roll back. The current tax year, then the previous tax year. And if you are going back even further, it would be a 3rd time. So you need to roll back for each tax year that you're going back to. Although going back 2 to 3 tax years is quite rare. So hopefully you don't ever need to do that, but that's how you would do it. Okay, so we have hit the Q2 mark. Well, we are a minute over. There was a couple of questions, and I know one's still being answered at the moment. So this is a reminder, if you do want to keep a hold of the questions and answers, you can do so by copying and pasting that into a Word document. As I mentioned, due to the fact we're using a webcast, which is why you're using it in a web browser, which makes it easier to join. Unfortunately, you can't download the Q&A at the end of the session. So in order to save that, copy and paste into a Word document and you'll be able to save it. And if you haven't already, grab a hold of the handout. I hope you've enjoyed today's session and thank you to everyone who's stuck around to the very end. I hope you found it extremely useful, and don't forget about that feedback survey that you'll be directed to when we come to close the session. It does mean a lot, like I said, to both myself and Duncan, as we do read that quite a lot to make some changes and come up with new ideas to try and improve our sessions in the future. So thank you in advance. The last thing for me to say is I hope you've all had a wonderful time. I hope you've all enjoyed watching today, and you're all out there keeping safe and potentially enjoying some of the nice weather that we've had as well. And I know it's only Thursday, but I do wish you all a good weekend coming up as well. So thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you in a webinar in the future. Thanks again.